Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's CloudBytes webinar. Jim Norton, our software consulting manager, joins us today to talk a little bit about making the most of budgeting and planning tools. And with that, I'll let Jim kind of give an introduction and head on into the details of today's session.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Hi, everyone. This is Jim Norton. I'm a software consulting manager on Dean Dorton's software consulting team, working primarily with Sage Intacct as our cloud-based ERP. And I'm here to talk to you today about budgeting and planning tools, particularly as they relate to how you can work with them in Sage Intacct. So the objectives of today: by the end of this session, I hope you will be able to understand the signs that you may need more than standard budgeting, identify two options for integrated budgeting and planning with Sage Intacct, and then be able to continue discussions around the best fit tool for your organization. So the first section here that I'm going to present is 8 signs that you may have outgrown Excel budgeting and planning. So if you're using Sage Intacct with budgeting today and you're not using a budgeting and planning solution, then most likely what you're doing is preparing your budget in Excel and probably using the CSV import template that is available to pull your budget into Sage Intacct and then be able to run budget versus actual reporting. That is great. That is a very useful tool, and we are happy that we have it. But what happens is sometimes when people are preparing the budget, they outgrow Excel. And we're going to go through all the different signs that maybe you have gotten to the point where you have outgrown Excel and help you explore some of the other tools that are out there that can make this process easier, more efficient, and eliminate discrepancies when you're looking at various versions of a budget. So this first one here may look familiar. When you're doing Excel-based budgeting, often you're going to be pulling an all-nighter to get ready for a management meeting. And here's why: because look at all the steps that go into managing a budget in Excel, as we've got in this graphic on the screen. So you're going to download CSVs. You're going to cut and paste data into your Excel template, which probably doesn't line up with the way that you need to import something. So there's a challenge. Rolling data up, because often the way that you create a budget and the models and assumptions that you use are not necessarily based on your GL accounts. So you're going to have to do all kinds of data roll up to present things in the format that people want to see them for the budget. Updating formulas and links, and of course all the related link breaking and formula breaking that can go along with that. Building and updating your forecasts and models. So you're not just going to put a number on a budget. Often you're going to have 2, 3, 4, 100 different Excel tabs that have all of your assumptions that feed into your budget model. So spending the time updating that. And then emailing the file back and forth and dealing with all the different versions of the budget that you have out there. So if you're dealing with this, there are solutions that can help streamline that. Another problem that is common, you have maybe one person, maybe a couple people if you're a little bit larger, but there's very few people who understand how the model actually works. So when you're doing Excel-based budgeting, you've written all kinds of fancy formulas that are great and will help you ultimately get where you need to go, but they take a long time to maintain. And if you have very few people that understand how it works, that's a bottleneck for your budgeting process. So even if that person is still with your organization and hasn't left, maybe they can't, dedicate 100% of their time to just managing the budget and making sure everybody knows how to fill in the models. But what if that person does leave? Then you have the risk of not transferring that knowledge and struggling to continue to prepare your budget and maintain your budget. This one, formula error. So one of the inherent risks of doing anything in Excel is formula errors, and that certainly applies to budgets. So maybe there's a formula you forgot to update, and now the report that you're showing to management or people who are reviewing and approving that budget is wrong because you forgot to include cell A4 in your formula, and that holds a critical number for your budget. So formula errors are a very real risk and a very real problem. And it's very important in the context of a budget because that's your plan for how your organization is going to perform for some period of time. And if the formula error is giving you inaccurate numbers, that's going to be a problem for your budgeting because you're not budgeting based on solid assumptions. And the other problem is it deteriorates people's confidence in the reports that you're giving them. So it kind of has that domino ripple effect. People are not going to be as confident with what's presented, and that's going to give you as a finance person a lot more headache having to prove yourself every time you present a report. And people could potentially make decisions based on inaccurate information. So if you forget to include a critical number in your budget because of a formula error, maybe your expenses look drastically lower than they're actually going to be. And then that makes, the salespeople who love to spend money think that they have more money to spend, and then they could make decisions and make commitments. So that's a real domino ripple effect, and it's very dangerous. And that's just one example of how easily a formula error can derail the budgeting and planning process. Next one. Oh no, did I just send the one with the salary info? So again, another risk of Excel is that it's very possible, if you're managing multiple different versions of a file, that you could inadvertently send a version of a budget that has salary tabs, that has specific, sensitive information that you may not want to share. And you've now just accidentally emailed that to someone and there's no way to recall it. So, trying to manage the security of information by making sure you don't email it to the wrong person, or by trying to use rules on shared drives, it just increases your risk that the information could be seen by people you don't want it to be seen by. So a budgeting and planning solution is going to mitigate that risk because what they're able to see is going to be permissions driven. So we can eliminate the possibility that somebody could see salary information using a budgeting and planning solution, which is way less risky than obviously what happens in real life very often with Excel-based budgeting. This next example, another classic issue, multiple versions. So even when I use Excel and the many different ways that I still have to use it in my day-to-day job, I am famous for titling my Excel files version 1, version 2, version 3. And that's great if you stay on top of making sure you use the right one, but inevitably what happens is you're looking at version 2, but somebody else has created a version 3, and now the budget that you're using is no longer in sync with what everybody else is working on. So this again has a domino effect of you could be making decisions based off the wrong version of the budget, and there can be pretty substantial changes from version to version. So the way you're spending money is not aligned with the way that you should be spending money to meet your goals. When you've got a budgeting and planning solution, everybody is looking at the same source of truth. So you don't have to worry about, oh no, I'm looking at the wrong version. There is one version, and it's the version that people are all dialed into. Sending back and forth in email, another common problem with Excel-based budgeting. So, you're gonna be sending budgets to someone, and they're gonna say, well, when did you send that one? I can't find it. I mean, I can't tell you how many meetings I've sat on where people waste 5 to 10 minutes of a meeting digging through their inbox trying to figure out where is something that somebody sent. So imagine instead you're all working in a budgeting and planning solution and the source of truth is right in front of you. So you don't have to worry about where the version is, whose email it's sitting in. It's based on people's access to the system. And you can easily invite people into the system to enter and manage their own budget data. So you're not going to have a bottleneck where everybody's putting in their pieces and somebody has to compile all the different Excel sheets that people are working on to produce a master budget. Timeliness, another big thing. So this person in the graphic is clearly looking at his watch and he's not too pleased at the time that he sees. It's halfway through the month and I don't have the results from last month yet. Or the budget is due tomorrow and I haven't seen the Excel file yet because somebody is still compiling it. Somebody is taking the data out of a system and pasting it in and manipulating it to put it into the format that they want. Well, all that time is time spent that people don't actually get to see the data. So imagine instead the data is syncing back and forth between Sage Intacct and your budgeting and planning solution, and then you don't have to worry about spending the time to put together some package. People can have immediate access to the data that they need to see. And then the last, but certainly not the least indicator is you finding yourself saying, I don't have time to do analysis. So, budgeting and planning is great because, you're putting together your plan for how you want your organization to operate going forward. But the other critical component of budgeting and planning is looking at the actuals and forecasting using that data. You're only getting halfway there if you're putting all the information into Excel and importing it, but you don't have time to analyze it because it takes so much time to get everything into the budgeting and planning format that you want. So instead, if you've got a budgeting and planning solution, then you can automate your everyday budget, plan, management and forecasting, and then you'll have templates for what-if analysis to help you pull these different levers and determine what the best strategy is to grow and succeed going forward. So what are some options out there for integrated budgeting and planning solutions? It's a saturated marketplace, I would say, because there are probably at least between 12 and 20 different solutions out there that will integrate with Sage Intacct that do budgeting and planning. So we will talk about 2 different solutions today that we work with and do recommend. But before I get into that, I want to talk about generally just what are the characteristics of a budgeting and planning solution that you should be expecting as you are reviewing the solution. So you're going to look to expect that a best-in-class budgeting and planning solution that works with Sage Intacct can do some or all of the things that I'm about to talk about. So number one, they need to be able to synchronize the dimension values that you need, because when you're budgeting with a powerful solution like Sage Intacct, you are not just going to budget by GL account. You're going to budget by department. You're going to budget by location. You may even be budgeting by different projects. All of those things should be possible because it's all those little micro budgets that different people in the organization are responsible for that roll together and produce your overall organization budget. So you need to be able to synchronize your dimensions. You need to be able to synchronize your chart of accounts, because if you're going to do any kind of budget versus actual, people are posting their actuals to GL accounts. You need to compare what they posted to what you budgeted. Synchronize actuals from Sage Intacct. So a budgeting and planning solution should be able to pull in the actuals as well so that you can do some level of budget versus actual reporting inside your budgeting and planning solution, which is also the last bullet point here. But there's more. You should also expect that the solution is able to restrict data visibility to team members on a need-to-know basis. So having a budgeting and planning solution is not an open door for everybody to look at whatever data they want. You want people to only be able to see what you want them to see. So maybe you want to restrict so that people can't see salaries, or maybe you want to restrict so that somebody can only see a certain dimension or certain group of dimensions. You should be able to do that in a best-in-class budgeting and planning solution. You should be able to handle at least some moderately complex capabilities around creating a financial model to support your budget numbers. So when you've got assumptions that go into building your budget, you should be able to use those assumptions in your budgeting and planning solution to produce your budget. You shouldn't have to document those offline. They should be part of your budgeting and planning solution. You should be able to handle multiple versions and revisions of your budget easily. You should be able to toggle different scenarios and see what the impact would be. And of course, if you have a best-in-class solution and you're able to do all this, then you should be able to eliminate your reliance on Excel for budgeting and planning, because everything that you need a budgeting and planning solution to do should be in the solution that you choose. So what are the options? As I said, it's a large, you might say saturated marketplace. I'm going to review 2 options with you, and there are many, many others. If you do a search on the Sage Intacct Marketplace for budgeting and planning solutions, you're going to see way more than 2. But these are 2 that we work with that have relatively strong functionality, and they have a fast implementation time. So both of these solutions can be implemented in days, not weeks, which really is another key indicator of a budgeting and planning solution. How fast can you implement it, especially in the market that we're in right now and in the environment that we're in right now with so much uncertainty in a lot of people's businesses. You want a solution that you can get up and running fast so that you can use it for what you need it to do. So the 2 solutions that we're going to talk about, Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning and Mardis Solutions. So Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning, it's a relatively new offering, and it recently saw a re-release with enhanced functionality. So you may see the name Budgeta, and Budgeta is a solution that was acquired by Sage Intacct in 2018. And essentially, that's what Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning is. But Sage Intacct obviously has invested resources into it to grow it from what it was when they acquired it. It is a cloud-based budgeting and planning solution that's integrated with Sage Intacct. It eliminates reliance on Excel, but it does retain a lot of formula functionality and capability. So if you're used to doing your budgeting and planning in Excel, there's a lot of familiar feeling to what it's like working in Excel. And it has very easy scenario management and modeling capabilities. Some other things about Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning. So you have the ability to control whether or not people can see data at the budget line level. So if you think about it, that's really a tremendous amount of flexibility. You can control line by line what are people allowed to see and not allowed to see. The chart of accounts does not need to map one-to-one to your budget line, so that helps to reduce unnecessary complexity. So what I mean by that is you may have budget lines that maybe you've got your office supplies or your office expense, and you want to break down office expense into office supplies, maintenance contracts, copiers, all these different things. But then you want all those lines to ultimately feed back to the same GL. Well, you can easily do that with Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning. There is some reporting and dashboard functionality inside the tool, and there is some insight capability into cash flow. So those are the highlights of Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning. The other solution we're going to talk about is Mardis Solutions. The Mardis Solutions is a long-standing Sage Intacct Marketplace partner. They offer different pricing for nonprofit and for-profit customers. So for those of you in the nonprofit space, you are going to see a reduced rate for Mardis Solutions. For-profit customers, you will see a different rate, but in either case, it's a very price competitive solution. It is one of the most affordable solutions on the market. It again is cloud-based budgeting and planning that's integrated with Sage Intacct. Again, eliminates reliance on Excel, but you've got some similarities to Excel in the way that it works. You again have easy scenario management and modeling. Here's one of the differentiators for Mardis. So you have the ability to create different sheets, and each sheet can be owned by a given person. So say you have a sheet which represents your facilities department. You can assign an owner to that sheet, and you can also assign an approver to that sheet. But on top of that, you have the ability to limit people's account level access. So you can restrict people all the way down to a specific GL account, or you can restrict people from drilling down. So maybe they can see a total, but they can't drill down into the details. You can also restrict people on a dimension by dimension basis. The chart of accounts, again, does not need to map one-to-one, so you have that same reduction in complexity that I talked about before. There is, again, some reporting and dashboard functionality. One of the other great things about Mardis is they offer a separate personnel budgeting module. So if you want to have detailed personnel budgeting, you can throw that module in. If you don't need to buy it. But it budgets people with all the same kind of items that you would have in payroll, so you can get really detailed about what is the budget for personnel. And you can even do allocations of personnel to split people's costs to different departments or projects or locations or whatever you might need. There is forecasting and what-if analysis available. And another key differentiator of Mardis is budget approval. So in addition to being able to prepare a budget, you can have workflows around who approves the budget. And you can also have budget change requests with approval workflows. So with that, I'm going to go into a demo for the different budgeting and planning solutions. So I'm going to start with SIBP, which is the acronym for Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning. So here we are, cloud-based solution. First thing that I'll point out is you can sync information to and from Sage Intacct on demand. So there's a little sync button up here in the top right corner. I can click that. I will have to enter my credentials, so my company ID, user ID, and password. And then using the sync wizard here, I have the options of importing my actuals or exporting my budget. So I can follow through a very simple wizard to pull my actuals over. You can choose kind of what the scope is of what you're trying to pull in. And then you can also choose which departments you're syncing your actuals on. So I'm choosing pretty much everything in this case, but you don't have to. You can also pull in more than one reporting book. So for those of you who may be using something like contracts or something like allocations, global consolidations, committed spend books, there's lots of different books that you could potentially have in Intacct. Maybe I wanted to bring in my accrual plus my allocation in my actuals. You can do that very easily with SIBP. You also, obviously, if you have cash books, you can pull in your cash books. So I'll pull in accrual in this example. Then you can choose, hey, what am I pulling in? So you can pull year-to-date all months, missing months only, previous month, or even enter a specific date range. So I'll just do previous month for now to do a tiny pull. Hit next. You confirm what you want it to do. You hit next, and the import does its thing. So here you can see it's pulling in the actuals. You've got a progress bar as it's doing that. And moving along pretty quick. In this case, I only pulled the immediate previous month so that we wouldn't spend too much time pulling a ton of data on the demo. So we will just wait for that to pull in. And while we're waiting for that, I'm not sure if I mentioned at the beginning, if you have any questions, please use the chat button in WebEx. Feel free to drop in any questions you may have for me, and I will answer those in short order. So we're almost done syncing our actuals here. I must have had a great deal more data in my demo environment than I realized. So it's completed the sync. I should get a message any second now, letting me know that. Actuals were imported, so I'm done with that. So that's kind of the process of how you can get data back and forth. The same thing is true for pushing your budget back out to Sage Intacct. So let's talk about how we actually prepare the budget. That would be nice. So I'll go to the Inputs tab here. And the Inputs tab is substantially where all of your budget preparation lives. So one option to getting data in is using Inputs main here, and then going to all of our different budget lines. So over here on the left, I have my budget lines. Notice the way that I chose to have them presented here is I've got my revenues, and then my revenue, I've got all these different departments. So maybe I only want to budget revenue for a certain department, or maybe I just want to think about it by department because that's the way that I think about it in the model that I have. So I'm going to open up my counseling department here. I'm going to go to my service fees. And here's a bunch of different options for how I can put the budget in. So for the bookings here, I can say, all right, I'm going to have a different amount each month for my revenue. I can say the same amount each month for my revenue, or I can budget for a certain percentage of growth. The other thing you can do is have a different kind of line. So right now I've got a revenue line, but there are also line types for something like a perpetual license, so you can budget for that. There's line types for a simple subscription, so you can budget for that. Services, a SaaS subscription, so a lot of different options. I'm just going to use a plain old revenue line for this illustration, and I'm going to say this is a monthly booking, same amount each billing, keep it real simple, and I'll say this is going to be $100,000 a month in USD. That indicates that this is a financial budget, of course. And I can choose here what dimensions that budget is affiliated with. So right now I've got my general location and my counseling department, but maybe I've also got a project ID. So maybe this is associated to a shared project ID. Could be a specific customer, could be a site, which is a user-defined dimension. So yes, we do support pulling in user-defined dimensions into the solution. So I'm going to pick a site here. I've got my location project and so forth. You do have the capability to do what's called an advanced cache and recognition option. So if maybe I want to forecast kind of when the cache is going to be received and when the revenue is going to be recognized, I can do that as well, and that will affect certain reporting. So I'll keep it simple here, save this line, and now that's been incorporated into my budget. And you can see obviously up here, it's showing me what the impact is of whatever I put into the input section. So that is one way to get your budget information in. Now, why don't we look at the expense side of the equation? So if I go down to my operational expenses here, again, I'll pick on counseling services, and I'll look at my office supplies budget. Again, there's different types of lines, and if you're ever curious as to what each type of line means, the little information box is here. So this will tell you what an expense is, but then maybe I wanted to go to a different kind, like a professional services, for example, and I can see what that means. Right? So this is only going to tell you what type of line is. Now you do have the option as well to depreciate an expense. So maybe one of the expenses that you're budgeting is a capital purchase. You can tell it, all right, I'm making this purchase, but I want you to depreciate it over whatever the period is. Here's the type of asset, and here's when I start using it. So that could be very handy if you've got an expense that's maybe a prepaid or a fixed asset purchase. Another option, which I really like, this is a nerdy option, but also very relevant for people who work on budgets, is the model. So if I go to my inputs in my model, here I've got a model for a certain event. So maybe you're hosting a customer conference, or maybe you're hosting a fundraising event if you're a nonprofit. You can document all of your different assumptions that build a budget number. So here, for example, I'm looking at an annual meeting. And I'm making assumptions about how many people are going to attend, how many event sponsors or a low-level sponsor am I going to have, how many mid-level sponsors am I going to have, and what is the presenting sponsor? Am I going to have one of those? Probably. But I've got all those assumptions here. And then I can use these assumptions to do math. So look, for example, at my early bird attendees. If I hit edit on this calculation here, or model line, as we call them in SIBP, I can name this calculation. So this is my early bird attendees. It's the same formula for each month, but look here. This looks very familiar, doesn't it? It looks kind of like Excel. So this is what I was talking about when I said it has that familiar, comfortable Excel feel that people are probably used to working with. So if I click inside this cell here where I'm determining the budget amount, I can easily build a formula, and I can look at all the different attributes that I've got. So I've got my assumptions available here. I've got results of other calculations available here, and I can use all of them to calculate a model line. So in this case, I've taken my attendees. I figure 60% of them are going to be early birds, and I multiplied them by $65, which is my ticket price. So all of that is easy to see in there. The other thing I can do here is put comments. So I can say, in this model line, use attendees times 60% times ticket price and save that. And now here, somebody who may be filling this in is going to have the instructions about what to do. So, the value of this is you can give access to people who are maybe your department heads or who are responsible for certain events. You can give them access and have them fill this in and just give them guidance as to what they need to do. And then that'll feed in, and it ultimately will result in giving you a budget, which you can use, sync to Sage Intacct, and use for budget versus actual planning. So that's one example. And then notice here that this line says that it's linked. What that means is this is directly feeding into a line on my budget over on the Inputs tab. And if I actually go back and look at this, down at the bottom, I can see it's linked to a budget line called Annual Meeting. So if I go back over to my Inputs main, I can search for Annual Meeting, so I don't have to keep navigating through the tree to figure out where something is. And here it is. So you can see, I don't have any budget for 2021 there. I have it here. But you can see that this says revenue from model. And if I click the little arrow here, it's going to take me to the model line. So if I'm reviewing this, it's very easy for me to know where that number came from because it's linked and I can navigate back to the budget with a simple click of that arrow. So the model is really handy for people who do budgeting and planning because you know that budget is not just stick a number on an Excel sheet with no support. Creating a budget is documenting your assumptions for how you got to that because you need to figure out, is that really going to happen so that we can plan for our organization's success? So once we've made all those kinds of changes, you can go back to Inputs main. We can kind of see overall look at our budget. So this is the structure of our budget. As I mentioned, you have the ability to share on several different levels. So up here is the very top. So this is the entire budget. If I collapse this, that's the entire budget. If I open this up, these are the different levels of the budget or lines of the budget. So say I wanted to share the whole budget with somebody. Well, on this little 3 dots hamburger looking icon, I can click that and I can say share. And all I have to do to share a budget with somebody in SIBP is provide their email and indicate whether they can view or they can modify. Now I can get fancier with it. I can go to the advanced options and exclude specific lines from sharing. So maybe I don't want somebody to see a salaries line. So I'm going to exclude salary and wages, for example. I can also say hide headcount. And if you look at the information here, that removes people's names and their roles and their salaries so that people can maybe see the grand total of salaries, but they can't see the breakdown of who it is by person. Now, we also have the capability to only let people see certain sheets. Maybe they can't see the models. Maybe they have a default view of budget. So a lot of flexibility here around what people are allowed to see. And all you really have to do is provide their email and indicate that they can view or they can modify. And you can do that at the top and exclude certain lines, or maybe somebody's only responsible, say, for the general location, or maybe even just the revenues. You can share just their piece. Say, I want you to have access to these revenues, so share that. And that's what they'll work on, and that's what they'll be able to see. So a lot of different levels and ways that you can share information. Very helpful, rather than only sending them a certain Excel tab and having to be able to incorporate that back into your budget. Now, last but not least, of course, is pushing this budget over to Sage Intacct. So if I look at my sheets here, I've got a report of what I expect my budget to look like. So here's my sheets, here's my profit and loss. This is my budgeted profit and loss for 2021. And if I go back over to my Intacct environment, here's a report that I built that has my budgeted profit and loss for 2021. Now you can see right now, my change in net assets or my profit is about $3 million. And over here, I've got $4 million. So I've certainly made some changes to this budget since last time I synced. Now, all I have to do to update that is come over here and go through the simple wizard that SIBP has. So I'll hit next. In this case, I want to export my budget to Sage Intacct. Now I have the options to create a brand new budget or to add to an existing budget, so overwrite what's already there. So I'm going to add to an existing budget. I can choose, do I want to add to it or replace it? And then I can pick what budget in Intacct I want it to overwrite. So I have this SIBP 001 that I want to overwrite. So I hit next. I want them to send the budget over monthly. I want to send over my profit and loss figures. I'm not budgeting the balance sheet in this case. So I hit next. These are the dimensions I want exported. And it's going to send it over to Sage Intacct. So what's happening in the background here is an API call is going on, and all the information is syncing over from Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning to Sage Intacct, where I'm going to be able to take advantage of that budget information for additional reporting and budget versus actual analysis. So I'll come back to that, and it'll be synced in a little while. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to toggle over to our next solution. Oh, never mind, the budget's done. So that's synced over. If I refresh this report, hey, look at that. My budget agrees. So my budgeted net income is 4294699, and indeed, that's what it was over here in SIBP. So, you know, seamless integration that just sends the information over, and you can do all kinds of powerful reporting inside Sage Intacct using that. There is some reporting in SIBP, which I'm not going to touch on due to our time constraint, but we'd be happy to show that at a later date as well. So our second solution that we want to highlight is Mardis Solutions. Just like SIBP, it is a cloud-based solution that is seamlessly integrated to Sage Intacct. So, you know, if you remember from the slides, one of the key components of a best-in-class budgeting and planning solution is just being able to sync your dimensions in your chart of accounts, because that's the foundation on which your budget is built. So the way that we do that in Mardis is through this dashboard section. So over here on the left, this is pretty much my menu for how I do anything in Mardis, but on the dashboard, I have a tool called the Updater. So Mardis is automatically going to update and pull from Sage Intacct on a nightly basis. But if you ever need to do something on demand, say you added an account and you want to get that in right now, you can just do a push button sync. So pull my chart of accounts, it's as easy as clicking that button, and it's going to run that, and it's going to be really quick. So you can see it's running, it's not taking terribly long, it should be done in a second. And you can do the same thing with all your different dimension values. So here I've got maybe my department sync, so I want to sync my department values. I want to sync my projects. Very easy to do all of that. And then I can go back to my updater queue and look at what's been completed. So I can see all the different syncs that I've run and how quickly they may have finished. So how do we actually get budget numbers in? It's great that we have the dimensions, but we need to build the budget. So the way that you do that in Mardis is through what's called the planner. And the planner is your tool for maintaining your budgets inside Mardis. So you can start out at the summary, and the summary is going to show you what does my budget look like right now. So here I've got the current state of my 2021 budgets, and I can see all of my different income and expenses by GL account. I can see them by time period, but I don't have to look at them that way. So maybe instead, I'm interested in looking on my rows and seeing my different departments. So I can change my rows here to a department view and hit load. And now I'm looking at my budget by department in the rows. So I can see how much income each department is bringing in, what are the expenses of each department. Some people like to look at things on a gain-loss or net income or net loss. So I can actually also look at it as a department gain-loss view. And here I'm seeing what is the net that each department is bringing in. I can set a target, and how does that compare to their target? So if I'm managing to a certain net income that I want a department to hit, I can set that as a target, and I can use this summary to easily tell me how people met what they need to meet yet. I'm going to set it back to the account view summary for now. So how do we actually get the numbers in here? That's a good question. The way that we do that is through what is called worksheets. And remember, I mentioned in the slides briefly, the worksheet is really a set of dimensions that each person is responsible for. So I can create a worksheet, and here I have a worksheet for all of my different locations, all my different departments that are part of a certain location. So I have a bunch of other locations. But you can see I'm giving each people just their piece of what they're responsible for. So maybe I'm responsible for the counseling department and I'm responsible for IT. But somebody else is responsible for youth center and food service and so forth. So by using the sheet concept, we can assign people to own just their piece of the budget and have them complete that piece of the budget, which will then feed into our summary. We can also assign approvers. So we can say, all right, well, after Jim prepares it, then Andres needs to approve it. Now, how do I actually get numbers in to my planner? So from the worksheet, I can hit edit. And you can see here, the first thing that it shows me is my actuals for the prior year. A lot of people like to use that as a reference point. So I've got my actuals for the prior year here. And if I scroll down, you will see that I have my budget figures for the current year. And there's a bunch of different ways to get my budget figures for the current year into this tool. So one way that I can do it is I can simply just go into the cells and key them in. It's an option. Are a lot of people going to do it that way? Probably not, because usually you want some support or some science behind how you do it. But it's certainly an option if you have a number that is simply something you can key in. Another way you can do it is by clicking this little calculator widget. So if I click this calculator widget, you have a tool here to figure out, how do I come up with this number that I'm putting in my budget? And there's a bunch of different ways to do it in this adjustment type dropdown. So you could say, hey, I think this number is going to be a weekly amount of $5,000. And you can preview what that's going to look like before you actually commit to putting that in. And Mardis will figure out, based on the number of weeks that are in each month, here's what I expect your budget to be. You can do the same thing with biweekly and preview that. All these different iterations. You can also say, and let me actually, before I move further, preview my weekly, say that I like that, and say set values and save. And that's going to update my line. So if I scroll back down to that line, I've now got that amount in the budget. But maybe I'm going back to it and somebody challenged me and said I needed to put more revenue in. So I can say, all right, well, they think that I need to adjust this up starting in April. So I can do an adjustment and say, I want to gross these values up by 150% and preview what would that look like. And I can see that effect right there. And if I like that, I can say set values and save. And I'll hop back down to my line. So a lot of ways inside this widget to get pretty crafty. You can also take an amount and allocate it between months. You can add specific additional amounts at any given time. You can copy the prior year's actuals or the prior year's budget. So a lot of different ways to work with this budget widget tool. Very powerful, very handy tool. The next way to do it, and probably again my favorite because I did a lot of budgeting as a CFO and documented a lot of my assumptions in Excel and wish I had a tool like this. So I'll save this worksheet. Another way to get your budget numbers in is this special purpose worksheet. The special purpose worksheet is kind of similar to the modeling functionality that I showed you before in SIBP. So if I go in and look at this, I've got a special purpose worksheet for an event. So let me edit that. And here I've got an annual meeting or an annual customer conference that I'm having. And I'm documenting, again, my assumptions. So the way that I do that in Mardis is I can actually document my assumptions on a month-by-month basis, as well as my quantities on a month-by-month basis. And then Mardis will produce a calculation. I can also hard code. So down in this budget item section, I can hard code certain expenses that I know without having to do an advanced calculation to figure them out. And then all of that culminates in the amounts posting to the general ledger budget accounts that I want them to post to. So let's break this down. If I go back up to the top here, I've got my rate section. My rate section means what is the rate that I'm going to be using in the calculation. So notice on the rate, I'm also indicating, when you go and figure out the end result calculation, where's that going to post from a GL perspective? So I'm going to have bronze sponsorships, for example. Those are going to post to event sponsorship revenue with a certain restriction and to a certain project code for that event. All of that is right here on the rate. And I'm saying, all right, well, my bronze sponsorships are going to be $5,000 a piece. Same thing with catering costs, same thing with my other sponsorships, same thing with registration. So my ticket price is going to be $80 a head. But then also notice I can get creative here and I can put decimals in here. So I can use this to multiply something times 25%. Maybe for example, I've got a commission, or maybe I've got an additional donation if I'm a nonprofit and I expect 25% of my registration to also be an additional donation. So I can calculate and multiply things times these rates. So I set the rates, and then I set the quantities that I'm going to be using with those rates. So I'm assuming here, hey, I'm going to have 5 bronze sponsors, going to have 400 people at this event, 2 gold sponsors, 1 platinum sponsor, 3 silver sponsors. And then down here, I'm simply multiplying rate times quantity. So here I'm saying, well, my registration revenue is my event registrations times my event registrants. So I'm selecting a rate and I'm selecting a quantity. But what I really love here is you can also use the result of a prior calculation as a rate. And that's exactly what I did here for my additional donations. So here I've got a quantity for my additional donations. And here I've got my event registration revenue, which is the result of a previous calculation. So here I'm saying take the result of this event registration revenue and multiply it times my additional donations quantity, which if you remember up top was 0.25. So able to really flexibly work with this tool to get the information that you need. So just for purposes of illustration, I'm going to show here a commission calculation. So I'm going to say here, let me actually back up. So I'm going to say up here, my commission percentage. So my event commission percentage. And when that's calculated, I want it to go to an account for commissions. I want it to go to whatever restriction, and I want it to go to my annual meeting event. And I'm going to say I pay out commissions at 30%, and I pay them on all my bronze sponsorships. Total fictitious scenario, but hey, whatever works. So I'm going to put in this assumption here. I'm going to save my work so far just so I don't lose anything. And then I'm going to go down to my calculations, and I'm going to say, give me my event commission percentage times my bronze sponsor revenue. And then I'm going to hit this arrow to recalculate the sheet. And if you look here, we could see that my commissions are going to run me. Where did that number go? Save it. Maybe I forgot to give it a name, which probably would help. Yep. Okay, so event commissions. Let me then say my event commission percentage times my bronze sponsor revenue. And let's try that again. There we go. And so my commissions are going to run me $7,500. And obviously that is reflected down here in the GL, which shows you what's going to push over to your worksheet. So when you're done with all of this, you post your model to the worksheet. And that's posted to the worksheet. So if I go back to my worksheet for fundraising here, I will see down in my budget section that all of these numbers came from somewhere. So just like we could go and reference back in SIBP, we can do that in Mardis. I can say, all right, where did this commission number come from? And I can click here to be taken to my special purpose worksheet where I can review all the assumptions that went into this, crafting these numbers. So very easy way to have all these complicated assumptions, or even not so complicated assumptions, whatever you have, that feed into your budget. And here I can see the gain loss is 121,500. And so I do have the capability to submit a worksheet into an approval workflow, like I said. So I'm going to save the worksheet for now, and I'm going to go back to my summary. And you'll also notice, if you look at the summary, that my numbers have been updated here, and my overall net income is updated here. So those are the different ways that we can potentially get data into Mardis. Now, once we get the data into Mardis, of course, we want to push that to Intacct, which is the next thing we can do. So in the planner here, there's a section called Intacct, and I can push data over. So I can say I've got my Mardis budget here, and I want to push that over to a budget in Intacct. Before I do that, I will show you the budget report in Intacct. So here we can see I've got a certain budget right now for my organization. I want to update that budget. So let me go over to Mardis. I'm going to take my pumpkin spice budget from Mardis, and I'm going to send that over to a budget in Intacct called Budget with Events. Now I can have this just overwrite the budget, which is probably what I want in this case. So I'm going to say upload my 2021 budget, say OK. And that's in the process of syncing over. And that is now synced over, so I can go reload this report. Notice my figures have changed because I just added a whole bunch of stuff. And we've got the different expenses and revenues that I had just synced over. So the next thing in Mardis is reporting functionality. So there is some reporting functionality available in Mardis. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it due to our time constraints together today, but I will just note on the dashboard, you can see some financial reporting. And this is going to be only what people are allowed to see based on their permissions, of course, but I can look at, for example, an income statement in Mardis. And what I really like about Mardis is it syncs over the actuals from Intacct as well, and it syncs them over in a very detailed fashion. So actually, if I drill in to my office supplies, you can see here every single transaction that was in Intacct has synced over. So it's syncing over the detail with all of its great dimensionality and all the memos and all that stuff. But on top of that, it also syncs over the attachments. So you can see the paper clips here. So if I'm not an Intacct user, but I'm a Mardis user, I can still see this detail and I can still see the relevant attachments. So if I click this and then I click the attachment button here, I can get all the way back to downloading the attachment and seeing the underlying detail to review, which could be really relevant if I'm a budget owner. And then finally, I want to talk about permissions and security. So we talked about in SIBP how you can share at the line level. In Mardis, we have more security at the moment, or more, I would say, a different way of working with permissions and security. So if I go to setup, I can have role-based permissions here, which those of you working with Sage Intacct are probably familiar with. And for a given role, I can specifically pick out what that role can do. And I have a lot of different options for the different permissions. Or I can say, let's manage this at the user level, right? And on a user-by-user basis to find my permissions. So I'm going to hop over to my list of users and edit one of my users. And then you can see here on permissions, I can assign them a role, but I also have the ability to cherry pick what they can and can't do. And I can also say, hey, this user can only see certain departments. So I have a lot of flexibility there. On top of that, I did talk about the concept of Mardis getting all the way down to the GL level with its restrictions and permissions. So over here on the permissions, you see a couple different permissions that influence that. Here you can see view restricted accounts, view drill down limited accounts, and view excluded data. So a restricted account in Mardis means the account is confidential. It is not going to show on the reports or the budgets if people don't have permission to view restricted accounts. So you could set a salary account as a restricted account and people will just never be able to see it at all. View drill down limited accounts means you can see the account total, but you cannot drill down into it. So if you set an account as drill down limited, if somebody does not have permission to drill down, they will not be able to drill down. So in that case, maybe somebody could see the grand total that is booked to a salaries account, but they cannot see what's inside of it because they can't drill down. If they try to drill down, they'll just see nothing. And then finally, view excluded data. So excluded data means that the data does not show up on a dashboard report or a planner summary unless somebody has this permission. If I have the permission to view excluded data, then I can go to this planner and I will have the ability to check this checkbox that says include excluded data. And that would change my report to include the accounts that are excluded. So if I don't have the permission to check that box, then any account that's flagged as excluded is not going to be visible to me. So lots of different ways in Mardis to control whether or not people can see the data all the way down to the GL level. So you have the flexibility not only of restricting them by dimension, but also restricting them by GL account, which is a big differentiator. And with that, that concludes my presentation. So I'm just going to put my slides back up. If anyone has questions, please do feel free to throw them out. If you're interested in potentially having a budgeting and planning solution or just talking about it further, reach out to us. We're happy to help you explore what the best fit might be. And thank you all for attending the CloudBytes, and we look forward to talking to you soon.